I think I'll let you go down, so I'll let the other panelists to comment on your example. So I would like to welcome up here our panel. We'll start with Mr. Johannes Ludwig, who's chairman of Nationale Normenkontrollrat in Germany. I also would like to ask Mr. Frans Timmermans, Mikael Damberg, Paul Mollerup, and Andrea Vermel to take place at the chair tables. We don't have very much time, only 15 minutes, but so I will first let Mr. Ludwig to comment on what we heard, and I'm especially interested in what you believe can be done as regards the implementation of EU legislation in the member states. What can be more done here, because that has been one of the main focus for this discussion this far. And then I will open for questions from you in the audience. So first, please, Mr. Ludwig, what do you think? What should be done?
Well, before taking the next half an hour or so, to comment again on what was said already, I think I will limit myself to say yes. I think I can subscribe to everything what I think Vice President Timmermans actually said. There's nothing we need to add. Maybe one element, and that it became clear in the discussion or in the other contributions here, and that is the question: to what extent do we have real transparency on the implementation of EU law in member states? And I remember we discussed that, and Paul, I think he will agree with me, already in the Stoiber group. And we addressed to the Commission, and we said, you have to follow that anyway, because if member states do not comply, I think, then they have to launch, I think, legal procedures, etc. So there must be information, and is it not a possibility to open up, I don't know, kind of data bank or whatever, so that everybody can learn from best practices what member states, different member states, did in implementing EU legislation. And I think you agree the reaction of the Commission officials at that time was extremely reluctant in saying, no, we are not able, and we don't see that really as relevant. So that is, I think, from everything else, I think on 95% we agreed. This is an element which is new and could be extremely helpful. Maybe it's worthwhile, I think, to think about.
Yeah, because what you're saying is, without this kind of transparency, you will never be able to do the best practice that Paul was asking for.
But everybody, I was a civil servant myself, sitting in ministry. I think you have to implement something what was decided upon in Brussels. You ask yourself, how can I do that? You know, and of course, the first thing is you look around and say, how do other people do that? You know, and if every member state, I think, starts doing that on its own, it could be more rational and more efficient. I think to have some basis, some data bank, whatever, you know, transparency in how implementation actually was done. So I think this is not a question of principle, it's just a question of practicality. So that is something I think could be really worthwhile to reflect upon. I think what the minister said, only one point is, you said, I think everything will be becoming less burdensome because we have e-government and we have electronic. This is a little bit me from my own experience in Germany, you know. I think, nevertheless, you need reduction targets, because that puts pressure in the system. If the government knows I have to achieve something by a certain date, you will make more efforts, in my experience, you know, than simply saying, yes, there will be government, and if it's available, then we are going to implement. If a little bit later, okay, it's not really a big problem. It really makes a difference. We have seen in Germany, when we introduced in 2000, or 2 years ago, one in, one out rule, you know, the way ministry started, I think, to discuss internally new proposals changed dramatically, because they knew there was now really a frame. They could not really produce cost, I think, in unlimited dimensions. And the minister in charge was obliged, till the end of the legislative period, if there's additional cost, to compensate that by reduction somewhere else. A very strict rule. And the way the ministries we started discussing internally, preparing the minister, was much more careful, I think, than before. That's at least our German experience. And I can say after 2 years now, of course only German legislation, because on Brussels we don't have a direct influence, you know. The burden, the legislative burden, the compliance costs are 1.5 billion euros below what they were 2 years ago. So this is, I think, we never had that in Germany before. Usually it was always increasing, and now we have 1.5 billion less. And this is, I think, comes from these kind of clear-cut rules, transparency, but at the same time clear targets, which I think are politically visible and are putting pressure, I think, to a certain extent, at least on on governments. I know by experience, having been a state secretary, nobody likes it in the government, of course, being put under pressure by other people, you know. And then the public opinion can always follow what is the performance, you know. But I think to be frank from our own experience, it's extremely helpful, you know, as far as the results are concerned.
But you didn't do like the Danes there, because in Denmark I understand, Paul, that you actually put up a quantitative target of 4 billion. You put an action goal, right?
Yeah, that's true. Government has put up an actual target.
And you think that is a more efficient way than they did in Germany?
Well, for one, just the other day the government published its annual report on burden reductions, and in that report you can see ministry per ministry how much of a reduction has each ministry achieved. And it then becomes a very interesting exercise, because if you can get to the point where the ministries want to be number one in reduction, then you've really achieved something. And I believe it's healthy if you have that kind of positive competition.
Yeah, because you get the pressure on the ministers. So,
yeah.
What about the 2020 target for Sweden, Mikael?
Yeah, we've had an increase over time, and 2016 was a bad year when it comes to this. We're digging into numbers now to understand also. I think it's important to learn from the increases as well, not only the decreases, but also what is really happening when the costs are increasing. So we try to dig into the numbers to understand why. Some of the effects in 2016 was kind of known. We knew that this would happen, and we planned for it, trying to get some of the black sector of society being more white, and that was a clear choice for us to steer up that sector. But others, we didn't expect to have that kind of result. So I think it's important not only to set goals, because we have a goal to 2020 to decrease, and we're not getting closer to that right now. So it is important. I think this seminar is interesting because you get inspired by other countries, what they have actually learned, what is really relevant and what can be done, but also what you said about priorities. Sometimes we should also look at what are the greatest costs, what are the biggest problems. So you make some priorities when you're working, because otherwise some of the effects are quite small and get a lot of attention and perhaps a lot of work, while other sectors are clearly problems over time, and solving these sectors are perhaps even more important in the long term. But just to comment on the digitalization side, I think it's not only a digitalization process when we're talking about restaurants, for instance. It is also digging into what kind of demands are put today on an entrepreneur. So by making that process clear from bottom up, you actually take away demands that perhaps just came about on historical reason or a local debate that was not relevant for the purpose. So I think getting into details, building it from down and up on a digital side, meeting your customers or entrepreneurs, that really makes a difference when you're doing the right kind of regulation as well. So I think that we will learn a lot from this project, I'm certain.
One remark is, I think we all learned this. Learning in Europe is extremely important. The whole setting up of the system in Germany 10 years ago was inspired by the Dutch example. And yeah, absolutely. So Acta was the front runner in Europe, I mean, if you look on the timing. And the fact that we introduced in Germany one in, one out was certainly inspired by the British example. Yeah. And the British showed it can work, The German government said if it works in the UK, it can also work in Germany. And as we have seen, it really worked. By the way, the Dutch government has set an absolute net reduction target, 2.5 billion. And we learned from ACTA recently that this was more or less now achieved, so successful. So I think we have a number of examples that these transparency, and in addition, I think setting clear-cut targets, I think, is something which is leading to good results.
Thank you very much. Now I don't see a question from the audience. I think you've got a microphone coming up here. And there's the sun.
Good afternoon. I'm Eva Hagsten from the Swedish Agency of Economic and Regional Growth. And I'm very happy to see that our recent work has been cited several times in the discussion. But what I was actually thinking about, and I want to pose this question to the group here, is a little bit too much maybe focus, I think, on the actual cost. I think why not take it into a little bit of a broader perspective, the efficiency of the cost or of the rule itself, and like, you know, having a cost goal until 2020. We are working with on this daily. We could give you outside here a forecast for next year. You might not be incredibly happy. So I think change the goal a little bit is one idea, but also of course it is appealing with having a restriction on the number of rules or some other. Okay, is this rule better than the old one? Then we do it. If it's not, skip it. From a non-politician. Thanks.
Yeah, that's Andrea, maybe?
Yes, I could say I could agree to that. I mean, you should always seek efficiency. The rules, maybe it's not that important that you compare one rule between the other, but on the other hand, you see, is this rule, does the benefits justify the costs? That's one thing. On the other hand, if you don't have a clear target, where should we go? Where should the public administration go? There is really hard to really know, as what was it, Alice in Underlandet, one if you don't have a target, you can go wherever you want. So I think you have to mixture these two things, a clear goal and seek for efficiency all the time.
Yeah. I've got a question down there, and you will have the last question.
My name is Birgit Fransson. I work for
keep it closer to your mouth, because continue.
I work for a magazine for building workers in Sweden, and I wonder, the change of rules and decreasing of rules, how will it affect the Swedish authorities for work, environmental, and how will it affect the health and security, and what demands does EU have on changes of these rules?
I don't know what to take that. Yes, Mr.
I'd
Timmermans.
like to start on this because this is very much what I was confronted with when I started with better regulation. I was attacked very, very strongly in the European Parliament. The Greens, they keep at it, by the way. They still haven't given up on that attack. And the position was always better regulation means deregulation, means lower social protection, means lower environmental protection. And I've always maintained better regulation isn't necessarily deregulation. It can be, but it can also be modernizing regulation. And I gave the guarantee to the European Parliament that this Commission would not lower environmental standards, would not lower standards of social protection. And I think we were true to our commitment. 2.5 years down the road, with the exception of 1 or 2 Green MEPs, nobody is making that claim anymore against the Commission that we have reduced regulation, we've limited the number of proposals, but we have not reduced protection levels anywhere. It is not necessary to do that, but we have to be very watchful that deregulation doesn't mean that you lower the level of protection. But it's not necessary. It's not something you need to do. And linking this to our earlier discussion about targets, as you know, we are now trying to work out how we at the European level could do targets, which is more difficult at the European level given the nature of European legislation. But we will get there. And my position has always been, do what works best for you in your national condition. And if it no longer works, reevaluate. Because 1 in, 1 out works for some. But if you look at the UK today, and then it becomes 1 in, 2 out, 1 in, 3 out, and then at some point it just becomes an arithmetic operation, and you no longer know whether this is actually leading to less burden. Then it becomes just a minister being able to say, I've got 1 new rule, but I scrapped 3 others. And in the real world, it doesn't necessarily have an influence on businesses. So you need to be transparent, but also be pragmatic. At the end of the day, it's not making a system work, it's relieving pressure on our businesses and making life easier for our citizens.
Thank you, Frans. Very short, Paul, and then I'm going to give you the last question down here.
Just as an example on health and safety from the Danish Business Forum, where I worked on that, you can simplify terminology so that small businesses understand what it's about without changing the policy objectives or the level of protection. Simplify the language. It's made by experts. Nobody understands it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Paul. And then I got you there, please.
My name is Kirsten Hermanson. I'm the managing director of the Swedish Security Dealer Association. And we struggle a lot with EU regulation, more precisely at this time with MiFIR implementation.
Yes.
And one of our learnings, there's a lot of it, the mirror and market abuse, it's time. Because it takes time to get these enormous pieces of legislation to come into force. They're enormous investments. And with this current procedure that is used in Brussels, you set a deadline, this is the time when things should be implemented. That you set already on level 1, but then you continue to do level 2, and you need level 3, and by the time you're implementing, you should implement, you're lucky if, like in my case, the banks and investment firms have been able to reach most of the requirements, but for certain, the investors, the ones should benefit from this, they have not had a chance to learn and understand what's happening. And I think this is extremely frustrating. And we really, it's all over the securities firms associations in Europe, we really request like in 18 months to implement things, to do it in order to do it properly. But why can't we have this system like that?
Yep. First,
the simple answer is because the experience since 2008 has shown that we need to get the financial markets under control. It is, I mean, if there is one area where we need regulation, if something has shown us that in the financial crisis, it is this area. But then, of course, you need to get it right. And you also need to evaluate the consequences. And I'm happy for the feedback. I think I'll take this back. We are going to evaluate the legislation. I think by 2019 we want to publish a report on how this is actually affecting the operations. And if it is an issue of longer transposition periods, this is also something that is open for debate with member states. So we can be flexible on this, but you know, the happy-go-lucky days in the financial sector are over for good. That is something I want to say.
I'm not asking for more happy days, but I'm asking for respect for the end users.
I respect that too, and I think that's a fair point. And I'm open to listening to your points, and we will certainly come back to you on this in close cooperation with the member states.
This one?
Well, it doesn't happen so often that we are sitting together and
no, but the problem is we're over the time.
More. And so I think what an important point of what could also be helpful is of course in this context are the impact assessments. And the impact assessments, I think, if they would deliver, and we have scrutinized a lot of them last year, more, let's say, hard figures, you know, and facts and quantifications. The discussion, I think, could start right away, I think, after the publication of the Commission's proposal and the impact assessment to say, okay, is that really also a good design for those, I think, who have to implement that? So we don't have to wait, I think, until the moment when everything is adopted. We should start, I think, from the Commission's proposal, use the time, usually 1 year or 2 years before it's adopted, really, to get a good design into the legislation, that at the end, the end user can say, yes, it's not what we have dreamed about, but I think we can live with that. And this is, I think, something, so in this respect, the impact assessment, the quality of impact assessment, the quantifications, all those plays a role, and I think this is something we still can work on a little bit.
I agree, but I also have to say the quality of our impact assessments has gone up hugely, and this is also linked with the Regulatory Scrutiny Board. You know, to be very honest and open with you, for many years in the Commission, the impact assessment was tailor-made to fit the purpose of what the Directorate General wanted to achieve. And this is not just a European problem, this is what happens in member states as well. So the moment you make the assessment of the impact assessment, so the scrutiny of the impact assessment, more independent, you discipline the services to do a proper impact assessment. And we have really revolutionized that in the Commission over the last couple of years. And I think you will see that the quality of our impact assessments has gone up. And we still need to do better, I agree, and we will. But having said all that, I've also experienced in the last couple of years, on the pressure of political considerations, also in the Council, the European Council, we are very often told, don't take this long with the impact assessments. We need this now, and we need to do it now. And I think we also need a bit of discipline at the political level to say, don't do without impact assessments, because you make mistakes if you don't do proper impact assessments.
Thank you so much, Frans Timmermans. Just the last question to you, because you said that you appreciated that Swedish support. It was pragmatic, working with this better regulation work. Where do you want Mr. Mikael Damberg to be more effective and stronger, more forceful in the European Union context?
Well, you know, it's very interesting, and I say this also as a Dutchman. What we share, Swedes, especially also Danes and Dutch people, is we think that we have the very best solution in the world, and it's only time for the rest of Europe to understand that this is the case. And as a Dutchman, I say it takes me a lot of effort to convince my own compatriots that sometimes in another part of Europe they might have solutions that work at least as well as Dutch solutions. And I think this is sort of a Nordic sickness. I think Denmark has the same, Sweden has the same, and I think sometimes, you know, better solutions are also found in other member states. And my appeal to my own countrymen and to the people here is have a look around Europe. There are some innovative ways of thinking in countries you would perhaps not suspect that have that. This is something that's going around in Europe in a very strong way now. And stay in touch with your colleagues, invite them to come over, go and see them and talk about this. It's fascinating what's happening. Of course, at the end of the day, you will still conclude that the Swedish way is the best way. But the Swedish way will then be slightly even better because you were inspired by what others are doing elsewhere.
Okay, thank you very much. You take that. Then, Andrea, I'll give the word to you.
Thank you very much. I agree to 99.9% with the Commissioner, but I think I will guarantee that we will speak with our Minister and say we are not perfect in Sweden. Thank you very much for participating in our seminar. It was very valuable to hear, and also thanks for our company examples. And I'm looking forward to join forces and work with you as well as in the refit platform, following the RegWatch work, etc. And maybe just a spontaneous proposals. Maybe you yourself or one of your staff can join us, and we can go to Denmark each other and look at the implementation council. I think we have something to collect there, even though we are still in the Nordic countries. I will give you a small gift so you don't forget us. So please be here, and also Ms. Helene Wall and Lena can come up on the stage.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Looks like the miracle box.
Yeah, it's a miracle box.
Och det med det, mina damer och herrar, så är dagens övning slut. Så vi säger tack så hemskt mycket och välkomna åter.